Dzień dobry kochani, witam serdecznie wszystkich na
Welcome everyone during the conference of the Polish Wind Energy Association. But before we proceed with the opening session, I'd like to cordially welcome you here. Thank you very much for coming. There are so many benevolent, very important friends and guests that let me not to mention all of you by name. And during the upcoming 3 days, there will be many opportunities to talk to each other. I'd like to say that the wind market has gained its momentum and everything shows that it's going to accelerate in the years to come. No doubt we have this momentum. The 10H rule has been liberalized and is the success of our companies, of all of you. This opened a window for further investment in onshore and offshore wind, and our effort made that people called for unblocking the 10H rule. Let me just mention some main parties. The business, such as Google, Amazon, IKEA, Mercedes, they spoke with one voice and they called, without new investment into wind, there will be no new investment in Poland. This issue pulled all the largest global corporations together, 15 local government organizations, associations of municipalities, mayors and inhabitants of local communities desired the 10H rule to be unblocked. They said, we need investment in wind in our municipalities. And then, probably the most important, the call of workers' trade unions. They desired jobs and they appealed to the Prime Minister, to Prime Minister Morawiecki, and thanks to their effort, the easement of 10H rule has become a fact. Thank you very much for your support. I'd like to thank organizations cooperating with us. Many of them are represented today. And I'd like to thank my team that I count on during all the difficult moments. And you know that from the beginning of this year, we've had many such moments. The team is the foundation of every company and every organization. And we, as the Polish Wind Energy Associations, can enjoy a very strong team. Ladies and gentlemen, we all observe the development of offshore wind. The first projects started to become their implementation phase, and the next phase is right behind the corner. It's crucial how to use the potential of the wind industry for our economy, for our business, and these are the topics we're going to discuss during the 3 days of our conference. Some of the key headings that we would like to discuss refer to green hydrogen and changes in the economy with the use of hydrogen. We are going to discuss connection capacity. There are going to be discussion roundtables on Ukraine, for instance, where Polish companies can see a space for cooperation. We're going to discuss the potential of onshore wind after the legislation has changed, and we're going to have these topics and these discussions unfold today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. We're going to listen to our experts, and as you will notice, the potential is quite sizable. From this very place, I'd like to thank our ambassadors. Thanks to their effort and other sponsors, we have the possibility to welcome you today and to organize this conference. We have this conference and we have relevant funding for our activities, and thanks to this event we generate funds to play an active role in the discussion on the energy sector, in the media. All this thanks to you. I'd like to thank the main ambassadors of our today's conference: Equinor, Orlen Neptune, Respect Energy, and Vestas. In the period of major geopolitical challenges, such companies are the drivers of economic changes. They create and implement investment. We cannot change the direction of wind, but we can set our sails appropriately. Our ambassadors sail with the wind, with full speed ahead. So now let me invite to the stage a journalist of Polsat News, Dominika Tarczyńska, responsible for the Clean Air program. So Dominika, over to you, and please officially open the conference.
Thank you very much. A very warm welcome. Thank you for this invitation, and it is a great honor for me to be the host of this opening session. My TV program is called Clean Poland, but we talk about clean air a lot. We have a lot of distinguished guests here, so I will not take any more of your time. Let me invite to the stage Paulina Górska, also known as Eco Paulina, a journalist, eco-educator, the author of a podcast, Better Climate. Very well linked to our today's panel. So applause for Paulina. Wojciech Kukuła, Client Earth Lawyers for Earth Foundation. Marco Verspuy from Equinor, the world's largest wind farm operator. And Krzysztof Zalewski, musician and wind power ambassador in the Flowing with the Wind campaign. Welcome to our panelists. The mic is working. Let's start with Paulina Górska. Paulina runs a blog with the speed of wind. I would like to say the speed of light, but it's with the speed of wind that she informs her followers about the most important news regarding sustainability, ecology. I often follow her news. You keep in touch with a lot of people. You have a lot of followers, 120,000 followers. It is an enormous group. Can you tell us what about the climate? What is the awareness and attitude of your followers with regard to renewables and the climate? What are the questions that they ask? Well, let me welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My community is 117,000 people following me on Instagram. And indeed, it is a very special and quite well-informed and aware group of people who are informed and who are interested in climate, clean energy, sustainability. But they are also very intrepid. They ask a lot of questions. They question some obvious things, apparently. But on the other hand, they are also aware of the things that have the largest impact. So not necessarily going to a supermarket with a cotton bag, but more shifting to a plant-based diet or limiting your meat consumption or shifting to clean energy. And they ask questions to businesses. They hold them accountable. 57% of companies. In 2021, there was a survey. 57% of stock exchange listed companies do not have climate impact management in their strategies. And this is something very frustrating to many people. And they have this feeling that the burden of responsibility is shifted to their shoulders, where in fact it should be businesses, companies who should take the biggest steps and the biggest responsibility. But I am also aware that my community is just a bubble, and I cannot extrapolate that to the entire society. And if we were to use social science surveys, in Poland we have knowledge about the fact that we have less and less typical climate denialism, where people claim that it's not humans that cause climate change, it is the volcanoes or whatever. So we are aware of that, but this doesn't necessarily translate into change of our habits. Surveys show that with regard to changes in our everyday habits, we are quite willing to shift the responsibility to others, other social groups. So it's not us, it's someone else who should change their ways and their habits. In the most recent survey, surveys show that we feel that we have the knowledge about climate, but when verified by experts, our knowledge is on a very low level, let's say grade D. So it is not the best situation that we have in Poland. And another thing, something very important for me, I used to work as a journalist for many years. In Poland we have an enormous problem with disinformation, misinformation, fake news. Social media abound in this type of misinformation. I also operate in social media, but social media are the source of knowledge about the world for many people. This is where we get our news, where we get our information. So in my well-informed community of followers, I can see statements like wind turbines killing caterpillars or causing headache in people who live nearby, or solar panels take away sunshine, or Warsaw will ban private cars in 10 or 15 years from now, or the European Commission will force us all to eat insects. Many of you probably know these fake statements. They reappear from time to time in social media, and they come from this misinformation, from fake news. And we have a problem in Poland in separating fake news from real news, from news that are true. And there's a lot of work to be done in terms of education. And I'm very happy to be here because I can have an appeal to all of you, because I think that businesses should try to educate the society. And if we are talking about wind power, it should be done in a clear, accessible way, friendly way, to have a transparent way to demonstrate the problems in the industry or things that have been solved by the industry. It has to be done in a very educative way. And we shouldn't be only locked up in our bubbles or niches within the industry. Thank you very much. We also need a climate protection law. We don't have it in Poland. 16 member states of the EU have such laws. We don't. So Wojciech, why don't we have such a law, such an act of law in Poland? You have presented such a draft in April. What was the reception of this draft law? What should it look like? Thank you very much for the invitation. I represent environmental organizations. And a word of introduction. Client Earth is an NGO gathering lawyers working with environmental protection, and we've been working in Poland for the past 10 years. In many ways, we do it in many ways, and we have prepared a draft law on climate protection. We don't have such a law in Poland, but there are many countries in Europe who have such laws, and this Sunday, Switzerland has become the 17th country to have adopted a Climate Protection Act. We presented a complete draft of climate protection law for Poland. It is sort of a roadmap based on best practices and solutions from elsewhere, other countries in Europe. Let me use the example of the UK. the first country to adopt such a law in Europe in 2008, and it was also the first country to adopt a climate neutrality target in 2019. So what we see here in Client Earth is that such framework laws do work. If we compare the UK to Poland, in 2008, when they adopted their law, the UK, which is a much larger economy, emitted 600 million tons of CO2 per year. Last year, they emitted 400 million tons, the same as Poland. In Poland, our emissions have slightly grown in the past year, year on year. In the UK, the emissions dropped by 200 million tons. So they have such a law, and their level of emissions with a much larger economy is the same as Poland's. So this is a good moment for us to start these discussions and to have such a law passed, because Poland is a passenger traveling without a ticket on the energy transition train in Europe. Our obligations, our targets are very vague in our national environment, energy and climate plan. We declare that we will reduce our emissions, but the reference level is 1990. So we have already met those targets after the system transition from the communist industry, communist system to a free market economy. So we have become less emission intensive. So our forecasts show that we will not reduce our emissions in the coming years, that they will stay more or less on the same level of 400 million tons of CO2 every year, where the EU's target is minus 55% until the end of this decade. So this means that other countries would have to reduce emissions for us. We have a lot of third-party analyses, and they show that in 2043, Poland will be unable to pay its climate debt to the planet. We are responsible for 1% of global CO2 emissions, and it is quite a lot. We should do much more as Poland. And climate change is visible right here and right now. We can see the issue of drought that is recurring every year. We are in June, and we have serious drought in Poland, where normally the most serious occurrence of drought is in August. So we will not only have to reduce our emissions, but we'll have to get ready for the changing climate. So now, after this introduction, speaking of our draft, our constitution, Article 74, mentions environmental security, that public authorities are required to ensure environmental security to the current and future generations. So what we are missing here is a roadmap for climate protection here in Poland. And our draft includes 6 main points. First, specific climate targets, including climate neutrality by 2050, the latest, similarly to EU targets, but also more short-term targets for 2030, minus 55%. And we would have 5-year emission budgets, things that works well elsewhere in the world, like in the UK. We can see their emission levels dropping significantly, very rapidly. The second point, climate adaptation plans, national and regional plans, also for municipalities above 20,000 inhabitants. The third point, future-oriented investments. Let's call it 500 plus for climate. We propose for 1% of Polish GDP every year to be allocated to green investment projects. If we look at absolute figures, it would be about 36 billion zlotys, according to figures of last year, 1% of GDP. It is something working in other sectors. We have an obligation to spend at least 2% of our GDP on defense. So we can discuss whether 1% is enough or not. We had a broad public consultation of our draft in April, and it is something new regarding those direct transfers from the state budget for green energy projects. We do not have something like that and we see that there is such a need. The Climate Protection Council or Board, something that is working well in the UK, it's called the Climate Change Committee. The right to live in a safe climate, an additional legal basis to control the activities of the authorities. For example, if a municipality wants to pour concrete on a square that used to be green, such a project can be cancelled based on the fact that it's not in line with the climate adaptation targets. Unfortunately, things like that happen quite often in Poland. And an additional climate verification with regard to environmental impact assessments for large projects, but also draft laws should undergo additional verification whether they will not cause harm to the climate. So an additional regulatory impact assessment for new laws if they are related to the energy sector, for example, in a broad sense. And we can see that in Poland right now, these activities are going in a different direction. If you are following the current developments at the parliament, last week the government started to dismantle the environmental impact assessment regime, quite contrary, in our opinion, to the EU law, which something that we have implemented quite well until today. I wouldn't like to talk about the details, but certain not clearly defined strategic projects would not require an environmental impact assessment under this new proposal in the future. Maybe I've taken too much of your time with regard to our draft law, draft climate protection law, but I would like to tell you that it will also affect your industry, because the better the climate protection in Poland, the more ambitious the targets, the more wind power projects we will have, the more investments in renewables we will have. This wind power is the cheapest source of energy in Poland's conditions, and just like Mr. Gajowiecki has said at the outset, we have taken a step forward this year. The 10H rule has been liberalized. We have, not quite understandably, but we have 700 meters distance limit. So it's better than what we used to have. So there is some room for development. The thing that I can see is missing, and I've been working in the energy sector and climate for the past 10 years. One thing that we are missing is the awareness on the part of the politicians and decision makers, convincing the politicians, political decision makers to this roadmap for climate. This would be good for business, because those markets where we have a clearly defined goals, clear targets for decarbonization, this would show us, this would be a signal for investment. We have been talking with large developers operating on global markets. Poland would become a more attractive location for their investments. And we hope for your support, for the support of global developers with regard to our draft law. I believe that such a law will be adopted at some point in Poland, sooner or later. I hope it will happen rather soon, perhaps not in this term of parliament, but perhaps after the elections. Would be great to have such a law, such a draft law on the political agenda, and then it will translate into actual decarbonization and more investments in renewables. We will have politicians here tomorrow, and we will ask them questions about that. Janusz, I cannot get used to the fact that you are a moderator here as well. You're often an expert, but you will ask a question.
First of all, I'd like to praise the organization, the Client Earth, Lawyers for the Earth Foundation. It's good that we have an organization doing so many good things. I've been following them for a number of years.
I will switch to English, if you don't mind. We have our Marco from Equinor with us, and the question is about the transformation. I think that this is the largest and most economic undertaking in the world today, transformation, energy transformation. And for sure, renewables have to play a major role in this transformation. In your opinion, is there enough support for the development of renewables in the world, taking into consideration your global activities?
Is there enough support? Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for inviting me, by the way. It's very nice to be with you here at stage. Is there enough support? Is there ever enough support? It is an extremely expensive business. In 2022, the world spent just roughly $1 trillion on energy transition, of which half was kind of invested in renewable. That also means that the other half at some point could also be invested in more renewable. At the same time, we would like to keep the energy transition or the energy in general affordable. Also last year has shown that there will always be a potential for geopolitical events which kind of move up prices, which will kind of make it much more difficult to keep the levels of investment that you like to see. But of course, at Equinor, we would like to invest more. I believe our budget over the next years is roughly like 30 billion euros towards renewable investments, or low carbon investments rather, because it's not only the renewable part that we're looking into. We would like to kind of also focus a bit more on the low carbon side, and that can be decarbonizing current fuels, but it can also kind of looking into more hydrogen related topics. Then coming back to your question, is it enough? I think the answer is no, because we need to move on. As my neighbor said, there's no kind of real consensus over the whole of Europe or the whole of the world. But I can't say that the specific Polish issues that were discussed here just now by my neighbors is really only a Polish issue. I meet them all over the world. And also there you can maybe cry for a bit more cooperation amongst member states, amongst countries in general. And that is what, at least at Equinor, what we try to do. We're active in Brazil, in the US, in Asia Pacific. We're kind of developing low carbon initiatives all over. We have an ambition to become a global leader in offshore wind without ignoring the onshore activity that can serve as a kind of a very good way into certain countries. But there's also limitations to what we can do. We need the help of governments. We need the help of initiatives like Low Earth to kind of make things happen. Because as you rightfully said, if there is an environmental act, there will be a push for more renewables in the system. And if there's a push for more renewables in the system, that's where we can kind of make ourselves shine. And if I just look at Poland, years ago it started with the offshore activity that we kind of deployed. Recently, a couple of years ago, we acquired Vento, which was an onshore developer. We're kind of pushing the activities of other companies that we bought into the Polish market to kind of make the value chain as complete as possible, to enable us to be a very, very active player in Poland. But of course, that is a huge effort, and therewith we need a lot of support. Yes.
Thank you. Krzysztof
Zalewski, before we ask a question to our ambassador of our Sail with the Wind campaign, let's see the video, the spots that we have made together. For certain, while driving across Poland, you could see a number of wind farms. Very soon, Poland is going to have offshore wind farms, a new sector of our economy, generating a lot of clean and cheap electricity. Why do we need such investment? Let's check it. Let me take These translate into benefits for Polish companies. And prices of electricity are important. There is even more important topic, sustainability. The more wind farms and wind turbines, the less CO2 and the faster energy transition. But it also means benefits for regions covered by investment, more taxes, development of infrastructure and new jobs. True. What else can we say to summarize it? Let's sail with the wind. We're sailing with the wind. More and more wind turbines in our country. Yeah, it's good. They generate green energy, so it means it's environmentally friendly and cheap. And very soon we're going to have offshore wind. Thanks to the offshore wind, electricity will be cheaper, we'll have more energy security. It's the future. Let's sail with the wind. The first question that comes to my mind when an artist participates in such a campaign is why? Why have you decided? Have you thought for long? Welcome everyone. I'm very glad to be with you. I had a pleasure to make a video on a wind farm, and it was obvious for me that we need to support wind energy. The campaign is developed on a relaxed manner, and every time I have this "Don't Look Up" movie in the back of my head. What do we need to convince politicians? Usually, smart people have the top positions in the country. So the most important thing is to educate people, because it's when people will no longer accept false information, politicians will not be able to do the same. And we had to struggle against the 10H rule for so long. And then someone decided to reduce that to 700 instead of 500. So this is similar to having a large comet approaching the Earth and people consider whether to invest into a venture to destroy that comet, or maybe the same funds should be channeled to develop infrastructure, housing, and so on and so forth. So if this is the main motivation for people to act, we're greedy by nature, then we need to finally agree that whatever is sustainable is economically justified, because otherwise we won't survive in the long run. So, of course, we can imagine that there is a small company producing a paving brick, and they can continue for years like that, but later on, children and grandchildren of that entrepreneur would basically suffer because of very hot weather. So I'm angry when I hear that only 1% of GDP is channeled to energy transition. But the foundation of all this is education. We need to educate people. We need to make people realize that it's not a question of their choice. It's not their decision to breathe with a bit cleaner air or not. It's the only choice for us not to suffocate. Draft is already there. Let's look at the Oder River. We have lower level of water, sewage is pumped there, which is not diluted, and then we just wait for another environmental disaster when all fish die and air is completely polluted. Food is no longer suitable for consumption. What are we going to eat then? Money? We need to be aware of the fact that it is something rudimentary. It's necessary. whatever is sustainable is economically justified because you won't be able to continue in the long run. Of course, I can say I don't care, but I have a 4-year-old son, and this changes my perspective completely. I wonder whether my son would be able to see snow in winter when he's adult, or to see a bee, whether he would be able to go to the river, breathe clean air, or maybe at the age of 30 he would have to carry a facial mask and a bottle with oxygen. So we need to make people aware that it's the necessity, it's a must to shift to renewables, and it's great that we have wind turbines, and hopefully, and it's good that it's also good business. If people can make money on it, good. Let them do it. Let them do something that's environmentally friendly, and everyone will benefit in the end. Thank you very much. Let me come back to Paulina. Paulina is an eco-educator. What do you find most difficult while talking to your audience? Which content is the most difficult to convey? At the moment, topics related to the energy sector, changes in law, system changes. When I start writing what new laws are going to be introduced at the level of the European Commission. When I write about wind energy, for instance, something that may happen at the Polish shore. And this applies not only to the energy sector itself. Then, when it comes to these topics, people find it more difficult to digest. People got used to very simple entertainment. This is what they can see at information portals. They have this clickbait, and whenever I write about something that is more difficult or a bit more difficult, their attention diminishes. This is what I see. Though one of the most popular of my podcasts is the episode that was recorded together with the Polish Wind Energy Association about myths about wind energy. There are many of them, and according to surveys, 87% of adult Poles encounter fake news, misinformation, and the worst category when it comes to misinformation is climate and energy, more than health and politics. According to the survey by Digital Poland, and at the same time, myths and pictures that we can see at various fake or meme portals, and they show a number of wind turbines buried in different parts of the world. It's interesting for people. People want the truth. They want to know how it really is and how the world can cope with it, where the truth is. So what Krzysztof has said is similar to something that I noticed when I started as an environmental journalist. Ecology, sustainability, and sustainability were not easy topics. People do not like such stories about bad things, and you keep conveying them. Aren't you accused, as I once encountered, that we threaten people? You're talking about this responsibility of individuals, and does your audience believe in individual responsibility? Because sometimes they discuss things that are not in their background, and people believe that they are not responsible. They want large corporations to change, and individuals do not have to. Well, my audience believe that whatever I do matters. When we say that individuals do not matter, it's detrimental to our fight for the climate. And I can give you a couple of examples. Very soon we're going to have elections, we're going to vote, and our decisions, our votes will have their bearing on the future, decisions that will be made in the future. And something that Krzysztof that has mentioned, we are role models for our children. I have 2 daughters myself. They will create reality in the future. So my decisions today as a mother, as a human being, whether I'm involved socially, will have their impacts. Our children watch us and they draw conclusions. Very often we say that the worst impact comes from business. Well, in a sense, yes, but business consists of non-abstract forms, but these are companies managed by specific people, individuals, presidents of boards, directors. So once we are aware, once we have this awareness at this level, we can expect some changes. An important thing while talking about individuals is to engage people socially. Today, we're not yet a civic society. Hopefully we will be. We are a young democracy, and it's important to build this bottom-up engagement. I have witnessed major changes. People are more willing to establish associations, foundations, climate organizations, and small communities that change their own space. They establish local gardens. They gather parents together to change something. And let me tell you about one thing that we should discuss more in Poland, and you, as an industry, can support this topic, namely citizen energy solutions, like energy communities. In Europe, we have several thousands of such cooperatives, and only a few in Poland. Why? Mainly because of legal regulations. It's difficult to establish such a cooperative in Poland, but our society is also not prepared for this. Hopefully, this will change. For example, we have an energy cooperative in Spain with 60,000 members, and their households are energy independent from large corporations. They have hydropower, they have wind turbines, they have PV panels, and 60,000 members invested 15 million euros to become independent. Your industry can support such a solution. There is an organization in Poland supporting people while establishing such cooperatives. There is also another organization, the city is ours, and they operate in several cities in Poland, and when they see projects of rebuilding certain squares in city centers, they object to them if these are not environmentally friendly, and they suggest more green, environmentally friendly and sustainable solutions. They show the way they would like to see their cities in the future. So these are examples that individuals do have their impact. It's important to go beyond our safe space of our household and to become more engaged in the community. And I like the topic of energy, civic energy sector. Quite recently, I ran a panel with local government activists, and they said that it's impossible for them to do anything because of the regulations, and that's why this energy sector is lagging behind. Wojciech, let me come back to you. I'm curious, when you put the draft law on the table, you had a debate with politicians. Have all politicians from different fractions attended that discussion? What was their discussion? What was their reaction to 61% CO2 emission by 2060? What was their reaction?
Of course, the reactions, the responses varied. From the government, we had Ms. Kamila Milewicz, but she did not have the opportunity to take the floor. We had leaders from various political parties. We had Mr. Boris Budka and top politicians from the left party. We had the Green Party as well represented. So the most negative response, or lack of response to our draft, was from the current government. We wanted to have a deeper discussion with the Ministry of Climate, but this hasn't happened yet. As for the rest of the politicians, those responses differ with regard to specific points in our draft. This political discussion in April, the most contentious issue was the target of 1% of GDP for climate, but not in the sense that we will be eaten alive, that there is 30+ billion zlotys every year that is now being spent on all possible targets all possible projects that the government wants to spend them. The response was that it's not enough, that if we put together all investment projects that the state approves from various fields, from various baskets, it would be much more money in total. So with regard to politicians' reactions, they differed by specific points on our agenda. They believe that we should spend more money on climate protection. This is the main thing, and it was quite surprising for us. I'd like to come back to take one step back, if I may, with regard to what Paulina and Krzysztof have said. I would like to say something positive. Please do. I can see that we have social and civic capital in Poland. We have some foundation, as shown by various surveys. So we have the social capital for change. Kantar survey company ran a survey on the 10H rule and the perception of Polish citizens about the need to switch from 10H rule to 500-meter distance. And we checked that according to voters of specific political parties, 68% of all voters were in favor of quick unlocking of wind projects in Poland. The further to the left, the percentage was higher, up to more than 90%. But even on the right wing, voters, they were also, for the Law and Justice Party, it was more than 70%. For Solidar Poland or Confederation, more than 50% of their voters were in support of developing more wind power. So it shows that Polish citizens want more wind in Poland. With regard to our draft, the surveys have shown that about 70% of Polish citizens would like to see such a regulation in Poland that would set a climate neutrality target within the next 2 decades. And 90% of Polish citizens say that the government is not doing enough, not even close to doing enough with regard to climate protection. So all surveys show that the climate crisis is perceived as one of the most important issues. And 80 or 90% of our citizens say that it is a real problem and we have to do more about that. So this is a positive aspect to that. If I look at my own journey, 10 years ago, the climate issue was non-existent. There was a discussion about air quality. Back then, Client Earth published a report, the first edition of the air quality report in Polish spa resorts. And the response was, no, our air is clean. And the climate was not an issue at all. We know how bad the air quality is in our mountain resorts in Poland in winter. So my contribution to this discussion is that the politicians have a basis from the citizens to take more ambitious decisions. Polish citizens want more wind. So in this context, it is disappointing that the liberalization of the distance law in the parliament early this year, it was not full-fledged. 2 years, it took 2 years for public consultation. No one questioned the 500-meter distance, and then on the home run, on the very last straight, it was changed to 700 meters. And our surveys show that Polish citizens wanted something else. They wanted to take one step further and to have more investments, more green energy projects, especially in onshore wind. Yes, surveys tell one story and life is a different story. That's why we decided to run this social ad campaign with Krzysztof Zalewski and Cezary Pazura, our famous actor, to reach out to the society. Because on the one hand, we have strong support, but we can also see lack of political support. So we need to do our work, we need to educate the Polish society as the industry and as companies. The campaign that we have launched is the first such large campaign for wind power and the first such campaign from an industry association. We received funds from the National Fund for Environmental Protection, and it is a historical moment for us as the wind industry. It is certainly a step in the right direction. And it is something very much needed, because when we ask people about their knowledge about wind power, for example, if there are any offshore wind farms built already, the level of awareness is only 15 or 20%. So that is why this campaign is even more important, and we will try to cooperate with the industry to make this campaign, to give it a broader reach.
How Equinor is contributing to climate goals, Paris Agreement goals, and the green just transition. In what way you can support Polish industry on their path to the green transition and carbon neutrality, Marco?
I think I will chop that one in two. And first of all, I think that Equinor is fully dedicated to the Paris Agreement, and it is therefore also we have a mission, and the mission is to kind of we turn natural resources into kind of energy, not only for people but also for societies, and with the add-on that we like to try to keep it affordable. Looking at what we kind of currently do for Poland is there is kind of real investment in offshore wind. We're developing together with partners, but we develop up to 3 gigawatts of offshore wind. We're looking at a pipeline of at least 1.6 gigawatt of onshore renewables, whether that is predominantly currently solar, but also onshore wind will be developed, including batteries. And so I think that on your point, I think there's more companies, international companies, that are more than willing to invest in Poland. But we need to get a bit of chance, of course. And I don't want to kind of be very negative sounding here, but there was an offshore wind round, and there was no international companies being able to compete, basically, because it was the Polish companies that reigned that and won those auctions. Fair enough, but we need, if you want to speed up, you need competition, and then you should kind of get that competition in, and let us compete. We're more than happy to compete. We are currently, and pointing at Piotr, but we're offering green energy to local Polish companies. We're cooperating with local Polish companies to get the green energy into the Polish system, knowing that a lot of the Polish production is exported to other countries, and those companies will kind of put this on their suppliers and on their vendors to come with green labeled production. And to come back to a point that you made, is that if I tell my kids that I work for an oil and gas major, I don't get a lot of bonus points these days. But if I tell them that I work for a company that is investing enormous amount of money in kind of transitioning towards a broad energy player in the world, that at least resonates a lot better. And that means that we have to kind of deploy our capital in a certain way. because yes, we do make money, and we need to invest it in the right kind of assets, preferably a low carbon, renewable. But there needs to be kind of an environment to invest your money in and to be successful in what you do. And I think that in Poland we have now kind of proven that we're kind of here to stay by kind of building up our presence I think it was one of the colleagues telling me earlier today that when they asked him, how long are you with the company? He said, 7 months, and he was one of the oldest in the company. And now we're kind of 100 people, and we're growing. And we will keep on growing. And I think that environment needs to be created for the companies that are willing to invest. And we can do a lot for Poland if Poland allows us, I'm quite sure.
Krzysztof, myślisz, że trafiasz z przekazem?
Krzysztof, with regard to your message, do you hit the spot? Do you reach out? Does this message reach to your fans? And I would like to ask you also about the role of a musician, an artist, or an idol, a music icon. Should more musicians get involved? I don't know if this message gets through to the general public, but my listeners, my perception of them is that they are environmentally aware people. They do not need special stimulus. But to answer the second part of your question, whether artists or musicians or public figures should take a stand on environmental protection, on ecology, sustainability, I would say yes, certainly. If I'm asked whether it is a role of an artist to take a stand on political aspects, and I always say it is an individual decision. Someone may want to focus on entertainment only, and that's okay, without getting involved in political or social issues. I have a different approach, but everyone is free to do what they want. But I believe that in terms of sustainability, ecology, every public figure should make their voice heard more, should make their voice louder, because it is our common good. The air that we breathe is the same whether you are a left or right-wing voter. This is something that we should fight for, and certainly education is a key issue. But in order not to sound too pessimistic, my son is too young, but the kids of my colleagues from the band are much older. And whenever I had the opportunity to talk to the daughters of a friend of mine from the band, they are 14 and 16 years old. Their environmental awareness is completely different. They are much closer to Greta Thunberg than my generation is. And I think that our kids, our children can save us because they can exert the pressure on adults to have a more serious approach to the energy transition, to have a more serious approach to the climate. Paulina, we've touched upon education, children and education. What is it like in Poland? What is the picture of that? Do we have any environmental education in Polish schools? Do we educate our kids from the very beginning, early age? There's certainly no structured climate education. There's quite a lot in kindergartens or primary schools. We have some sort of environmental education. This is not quite the same. We treat it as one thing, but it's not quite the case. I think that children at kindergartens or primary schools, they go to a forest, they clean up, they collect garbage, they are taught to close the water tap or switch off the light. And it is important to have these kind of habits that we have. But this is not sufficient. We know it already today. It is important to get socially involved. It is important to build a civic society. Activism is important. Exerting the pressure on regulators, on decision makers, making your vote count in the elections, learning about our impact on the climate change and learning how to prevent it. And I have an impression that we do not teach that at our schools too much. So this is something that we still have to do. There's a job to be done. There are some climate education initiatives in Poland, environmental education initiatives. I know that we have Kamil Wiczkowski from JNDC here. Together with many other stakeholders, he works for climate education in Polish schools. We also have students, we have universities, so there is a job to be done. We need more knowledge about the climate, and we need more knowledge about how we as individuals en masse can make a difference. I think that there's quite a lot of environmental education, but we need more focus on climate. It is not quite well structured in the Polish education system. Yes, we need it as a structured thing in the Polish education system. For example, secondary schools, there should be a specific lesson plan for climate. There are lesson scenarios available. This is already happening to a certain extent, but this is insufficient. There are countries like Italy where climate education has been introduced as a subject to schools. This is supposed to happen in Poland. There is some work on this, but it has not happened yet. Wojciech, I have a question to you. With regard to the 10H law, the main argument against liberalizing the 10H rule was that people do not want wind turbines because they are a nuisance in their vicinity. And you carried out a survey on that. What was the result? For the whole society, the whole general public, people want more green projects, especially wind turbines. When we get to a local level, in case of all investment projects, we have this NIMBY issue, not in my backyard. There will always be some kind of protest or conflict if there's a project in the vicinity. But it's good that this law has been liberalized and amended from the point of view of the energy transition. When looking at the general public, looking at the entire society, we looked at voters of all political parties. All of them wanted this change, and it's good that this change is happening. But another local component here, a positive one, is that we have some tangible benefits from these projects, because these projects bring money to municipalities. You published a report on that. Property tax in particular, they are a significant revenue for municipalities, and the municipalities with large wind farms are among the most wealthy ones, among the richest ones in Poland. And they can do some extra things like additional climate education at schools. Just a general idea here. So all polls, all surveys that I have seen show that the climate awareness among Polish citizens is improving. Everyone wants more things to be done for the climate. Everyone wants green energy projects, but not in my backyard. Well, it is a different story. It doesn't really matter if it is a wind turbine. There are also some protests against large PV farms or biogas plants. Of course, coal-fired power plants are even more questionable. They are much more invasive, both locally and globally. They make our climate worse. So I was a supporter of this liberalization going further to a 500-meter distance, which is a European benchmark. Most countries have such a minimum distance. In Poland, we are bound by EU's environmental impact assessment regulations. There is a plan to change them, unfortunately. So with regard to environmental impact assessments, there is also impact on humans as one of the components of the environment. In the legal definition of the environment, humans are a part of the environment. In 2016, we made this error of adopting this new law based on some specific project cases. In all industries, there will be some black sheep. But we introduced a distance criterion only for one specific type of projects in Poland. That was wind farms. And we need those wind farms in order to continue with our energy transition. So it's good, as mentioned earlier, that you see that something is happening, something is moving in the market after this amendment. Yes, let me just add that the distance itself is not of key importance. The most important thing is streamlining the procedures. For example, for environmental permits, environmental decisions, and the planning and permitting process. This is the main obstacle, the main hurdle for large investment projects in Poland. This process has to be shortened. Today, this is the main barrier making it difficult for us to meet Poland's climate targets. And also the issue of convincing the general public with additional benefits from wind power, as mentioned by Wojtek, property taxes, taxes that are paid to the municipalities directly. But there is also a possibility to acquire shares, a stake in local projects by local communities. And my colleagues from the industry show that even in the first weeks of this law being in force, this issue is raised by local citizens, local residents at meetings in municipalities. They are interested in purchasing shares in local projects. So this NIMBY effect can be mitigated by direct benefits, because the taxes are visible, but the individual residents do not see them in their pockets. And the municipalities do not always spend these funds in such a way that they are visible, or in such a way that it is clear that they come from wind projects. So this is something that we can see as interesting for local residents. Would you like to agree or disagree? Yes, I would like to add on the topic of resistance against wind turbines just next door. I visited Iklo in Belgium, where there is an energy cooperative, EcoPower, and there are wind turbines right next door. And they are approved by local community. Why? Because the turbines are theirs. They are the owners. This is what you have mentioned. It is very important to demonstrate the benefits and to support citizens-owned power. Let me ask Krzysztof Zalewski, do you see a possibility to have a festival or a concert that would be 100% plastic-free and 100% renewable powered? You need a lot of energy to power a large festival, a two-day festival. Do you even hear something about that? Globally, there is such a trend. Of course, if you look at the statistics, transportation, construction, and energy, these are the sectors that generate the most CO2. And it's not festivals or music concerts. But Coldplay, for example, several years ago, they said that they would not tour anymore until they find a way to reduce their carbon footprint. And they are doing whatever they can. I do not know the exact figures, to what extent they reduced their carbon footprint. But when they played at the National Stadium in Warsaw, there was a mat transforming kinetic energy from the crowd. And Chris Martin encouraged people to jump up to generate that energy. This mat was sort of an energy storage, and they were able to power some of the lights on stage. It may sound funny, but it's a romantic thing. You need to start with small things and from your own backyard. We might discuss, why do we need wind turbines? Because if India is against, then we are all lost. We need to start with our own garbage. So there were some small stationary bikes, and during the concert you were able to pedal to generate energy, and that energy was stored or used during the concert on stage. Okay, I hear that they reduced their carbon footprint. Coldplay reduced their carbon footprint by half. So it is something that you can check. So we have these initiatives. With regard to going plastic free, these are things that already happen in Germany. Many years ago, I was at the Primus concert in Berlin 15 years ago, and it was obvious. There was a deposit for a plastic beer cup or beer glass. If you were a student, you would return that plastic cup or collect others' cups and get your additional money to spend on breakfast. And it was also the case for me. I had to collect bottles to find out how it works. Plastic bottles are at a deposit. You can return them in stores and collect some small money for that. So these are small things, but you always can use an argument that an individual cannot do enough, but cannot make a difference. But you need to make people aware that that our vote counts, that we can make a difference. And the way we take care of our own backyard makes a difference. So perhaps at some point when we have a civic society together with our neighbors, we will be able to do much more. Alaska or Gilmore Girls series, why are they so popular? There is this ethos of a small community being self-sufficient and democratic. Democracy works best in small communities. So perhaps this is the future. In a large, beautiful country, we might have some local energy cooperatives or something similar. So yes, there are some ideas about being able to go more sustainable with concerts. So Janusz, there is an idea to have a 100% renewable powered concert next year. The best way for a concert to be renewable is to have energy coming from wind turbines instead of coal, the energy that we consume. This would do more than half of our job. What do you say?
Well, the question is where we're going to put all the attendees of the conference. Maybe we'll organize a festival, an outdoor festival. Our industry has been growing. There are many new faces in the room, and I'm very happy to see them. Before we had known everyone, but now we can see new faces. So it's a sign of growing, and perhaps we will organize an outdoor event next year. We're going to be present at our Poland Rock Festival with wind turbines, and we educate children. We have this program of School with the Wind. We started 2 years ago. We developed lessons for teachers, and we have a very positive feedback from teachers. They send pictures, and then they improvise. They take children to wind farms to show them how turbines operate. So the role that you play in education, in informing people, is highly appreciated, and we see that there is such a need.
Equinor is a new name. You changed name in 2018, and you used to be associated with fossil fuels. Now your ambition is to be a leading company in the energy transition, and I want to know how.
The name change was one of them, is to get rid of the oil part from your name. The second part is walk the talk. You need, if you want to become a broad energy player, do as you kind of indicate to the world. Just to build on the kind of the example, I was at the Coldplay concert and I was jumping on the mat. And this is only a very small example on how you can kind of initiate something, and then you need companies like Equinor to scale it. We can scale these kind of initiatives because even if you had a small battery at the Coldplay concert, we can scale those batteries to kind of the sizes that we need to kind of deregulate the systems. So I don't think it's a kind of an individual kind of effort from let's say the panelists here. it's a cooperation between them. And I very much look forward to kind of intensify that cooperation a bit more, because it's not the individual that can make the difference. But I would like his son to once apply at a job at Michal's office, because we're doing the right thing. As long as we keep, or we would have kept the oil part in our name, his son would never ever apply for a job at our company. So I think that energy transition is more than just spending a huge amount of money. It's a mindset, and it's doing. Don't only talk, do. And even though we're very aware that you can probably make more money in oil and gas still, we're still moving towards the renewable side and the low carbon side, which is far more costly, but it is with a real intent. And I think that is what I at least want to leave the people here with, that with cooperation and talking to us and working with us, we can get a long way.
Thank you. Było optymistycznie, było też pesymistycznie. Dobrnęliśmy do końca.
We had some optimistic news, some pessimistic ones. We reached the end of the panel, but I'd like to encourage you to stay here, because at 1:30 you're going to learn about the Polish energy transition and how investment in renewables will be accelerated. We'll have Mr. Jabłoński, the president of Whisper Energy, to tell us at 1:30. I'd like to thank our panelists for a very good panel. Krzysztof Zaleński, Marko Wyspiły, Wojciech Kukuła, Paulina Górska, and of course Janusz Gajowiecki in this dual role. Dominika, thank you very much for moderating this session. Thank you very much for attending this session. And in a moment, we'll invite Sebastian Jabłoński to the stage, and he's going to tell us about the energy transition in an interesting manner. Sebastian, once you're ready, please proceed to the stage. At 1:15, we're going to have at 2:15, we're going to have a presentation of the report on the onshore and offshore wind power in Poland. But this will be done outside the conference room.
Państwo, przed nami prezentacja
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to see the presentation of Sebastian Jabłoński on energy transition, the expedited development in Poland. The goal is to show the development of wind and photovoltaics energy generation in Poland and to show benefits of the process. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today I came to meet you with a presentation. I'm going to have the support of some slides that will protect me against holding everything in my head. I'm going to tell you about scenarios for the upcoming years for the development of the energy sector, assuming that we're going to depart from fossil fuels and we're going to build what is most beneficial. This has been frequently discussed by skeptics to new technologies and renewables. They say that it's more costly than gas or coal-generated or based electricity. Fortunately, relevant studies verify these views. False views, in fact. And let me show you my next slide. This graph shows energy return on investment, which means that for particular technologies, considering the energy and funding spent, we will generate certain units of energy back. There is a logarithmic scale, not non-linear, and we also applied the normalization of results for each technology to make them comparable. And in Poland, we can compare renewables with coal and gas, as these technologies are potentially available when we build a new mine, a new coal-fired plant, and to produce and generate electricity, we get on average 6 energy units back on such investment. So we need to extract coal, we need to transport coal, burn it in an installation that has supracritical parameters, and then we get 6 units of energy. And a similar transformation has been done for gas. T at 07, we're going to have less than 5 energy units per 1 energy unit invested. And for wind and photovoltaics, in case of hydropower that generates the largest returns, we don't have geographical conditions in Poland to develop this technology. And you can see that ROI in the chart, and photovoltaics in Poland can produce 10-fold return on energy invested. Even though we need to manufacture all panels, we need to produce aluminum, copper, silica, and we frequently keep hearing that these are unproportionally large investment comparing to what is generated in the end. In this slide, This slide represents more than 70 studies, and we can see that the EROI for photovoltaics is 25. And wind, that we are going to discuss today, generates similar values in terms of onshore wind, slightly worse parameters offshore because the cost of investment is larger than onshore. So we have clear proof that renewables are the cheapest sources of energy that we can apply in Poland. Of course, on top of that, we can add nuclear, we can add atom with a shorter investment period, but also very high ERI, and these parameters should be taken into consideration while selecting our strategy, while deciding what to invest in the years to come. Another aspect of our energy transition is what we can realistically build. And we developed 3 scenarios. The base scenario for wind, the status quo, when no regulations change for our benefit, and we keep developing based on the current legal framework. Wind slowdown, it's yet another scenario, a rather unfortunate scenario. We see our regulations tightened, and wind acceleration is the scenario that facilitates technical possibility of developing onshore wind farms in Poland without taking repowering into account and taking into account grid limitations that we need to deal with. And we can expect the development, this development of the capacity out of the current 8,000 megawatts that we had at the end of 2022. We can expect not very spectacular increase in the capacity. It is because in the years to come, we're going to make installations available that started to be developed in the past, and these will provide roughly 4,000 megawatts, and the new wind projects under the 7H or 700-meter distance rule will only be developed in the years to come, so we cannot expect much power to be generated onshore. And on top of that, we have offshore, and according to the declarations by individual companies involved in that project, we will see some benefits provided a new legislative framework is supportive, and then we can reach more than 30 gigawatts of onshore wind. It is not an extremely optimistic scenario. I didn't want to show you the truly optimistic option, but I focused on the extremely down-to-earth thinking, which means that we assume that we won't produce hydrogen. We assume that not every Pole will drive an electric car, and the energy transition process will be rather moderate. We will not have heat pumps in every household, and then this optimistic scenario will be optimistic for the economy. Once we decide to harness hydrogen, according to the EU strategy, in 2030 the European Union will need 20.6 million tons of hydrogen, of which 10.6 should be generated within the EU from clean energy sources, and the rest would be imported. It doesn't seem a lot to translate these figures into electricity. In order to produce 1 kilogram of hydrogen, we need roughly 55 kilowatt hours of electricity. So 1 ton of hydrogen is an equivalent of 55,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. And then we reach very high numbers. So for Poland to produce 5% of hydrogen planned in the EU by 2030, because this should be the share of our economy in the EU economy, we need 30 terawatt hours of electricity for that. And we don't have it covered in here. This is going to happen by 2030. And the offshore of 11 gigawatts will produce 44 tons. Two-thirds of that energy we would need to meet the demand for hydrogen that we should produce in 2030 according to the EU strategy. Then we can see how we calculated or recalculated capacity to electricity. We can produce 44 terawatt hours from wind in 2045 and roughly the same in offshore. Further, we have the description of scenarios for the development of photovoltaics. And there, the increase in capacity is much easier from the legislative point of view, because everyone can set PV panels on top of their roofs, and the increase is really large. Even in the baseline scenario, we reach 37 kilowatt hours. Roughly 75% of that capacity come from rooftop installations. And for the well-being of the grid, this should be compensated with the wind capacity. Considering that from the legislative point of view, the situation is difficult. It's difficult to prevent people installing PV panels on top of their roofs. And we can see that currently politicians encourage everyone to develop PV installations on top of their roofs. In order to countervail this difference between winter and summer periods, we need much capacity in wind. And the capacity there should exceed the demand, which will then necessitate to curtail generation. And for the majority of investors at the moment, it is a major question mark how to deal with this problem, and it's a big question mark regarding the scale of the process. We had one Sunday recently, and we were terrified with the cost of profile on Sundays when we have an extreme generation from PV installations. As you can see, I have this difficulty to deal with, to use this remote control. This slide shows scenarios for PV installations and their development. We plan to grow from the current 15 terawatt hours that we are going to generate this year to 25 to 57 terawatt hours of electricity.
Później musimy to sumować.
Then we have to sum up these figures, and when we add offshore, onshore wind and PV,
nie mając żadnego ekstremalnego
without any extreme scenario,
w naszych rozważaniach, zwiększamy moc.
we will increase our capacity in renewables from 24 to 47 and maximum 100 gigawatts of installed capacity. At the same time, our demand
będzie się zmieniał w dużo mniej dynamiczny sposób.
will grow less rapidly.
W 2023
In
roku
2023, the demand
wartość około
is expected at the level of 168 to 170 terawatt hours, depending on the recession that we'll have to deal with. Now we see the drop in demand from the beginning of this year,
z jednej strony trochę pogodą,
which is caused by weather on the one hand, and on the other hand,
tym, że mamy kryzys
by the fact that we have this energy crisis and companies have less orders, fewer orders, and they try to optimize the consumption of electricity once there was this panic on the European market last year.
In the coming years, we expect to have a modest growth in demand between 0.75 and 1.5%. This is a scenario where we do not have a significant economic growth, and we are not decarbonizing those sectors of the economy that are not electrified right now. So from the current 170 terawatt hours, the demand would grow to about 190 terawatt hours.
Terawatogodzin energii elektrycznej. Przy czym ten pikowy popyt, czyli
peak demand,
nie będą zużywać 100 giga,
where people will not consume 100 gigawatts of power when renewables generate the most, and we will not use 3 gigawatts when renewables generate the least.
Musimy uświadomić sobie,
so we need to be aware of the necessity to have some flexibility measures introduced into our power system. So on the one hand, renewables would have to be curtailed, and on the other hand, the demand would have to respond to supply. So the consumption would have a different profile than today. We have the percentage share of this perfect production. So if all the sources that we build generate for 100% of possible time, how much share of renewables we will have in our demand? So with the current assumptions, we would grow from 23% this year to between 51 and 98% in 2035. So in theory, we would be able to go to 100% renewable within the next 12 years in Poland. But then we have the grid operation realities coming into the picture. So we have the scenarios where scenarios for a number of hours where we would have to curtail sources due to the fact that there would be no demand to consume that electricity, and the TSO would not be able to balance the system. We had a small hint of that. There were 4 hours possible for that, but the TSO, PSE, the Polish TSO, has the right tools and they have good management of the grid. so they minimize the need to curtail renewables. This year we expect to have about 40 hours of such situation. But with time, this number will grow very quickly. In 2027, we can expect about 500 hours where renewables would have to be curtailed. And in the ambitious scenario, in 2030, in 2035, it would be 5,000 hours. 5,000 hours where we would have to curtail generation in our sources if we don't increase the flexibility in our system. So we would have to take certain measures for our projects in advance, and we would have to plan certain activities like energy storage to minimize the impact of curtailment on our financial results. So every hour where there's more power from renewables than the system can consume, the highest price would be 0 zlotys. In case of wind, the situation is quite convenient or comfortable. All wind turbines are in the hands of professional owners, market players, and they can curtail those assets. They can switch them off. So if, in parallel with the development of renewables, there is a development of tools supporting wind asset owners in order not to lose money on negative prices, then they will not occur, or they will occur to a very limited extent. So the price will stop at 0 because we will switch off, we will curtail our units. If we do not introduce such solutions, there will be negative prices. And currently, the most hardcore example is the Netherlands, where there's about 8 gigawatts of excess capacity from PV. It is rooftop PV that cannot be controlled. So a Dutch citizen with a rooftop PV installation, they do not switch it off. And their operator has a problem, because the price is minus 400 euros. And then it's minus 400 euros for the entire market. Of course, it is a temporary situation. Certainly, in response to those negative prices, there will be some control measures, or there will be increased power consumption in hours with negative price. So now moving on to the next slide, how do those hours, those numbers of hours, translate into energy put to waste? Because here we have only the number of hours without the volume of energy. Here we have the same thing from the previous picture, but only presented in figures. If someone is interested, we can send this presentation to you. It is not highly advanced in terms of technology, but it gives you a certain picture of what we are going to face in the coming years. That was the purpose of my presentation. Well, the good thing is that whatever I see on the screen is what you see on your screen. So, we have the volumes in terawatt hours. On the left, you can see total generation from renewables, and on the right, we can see how much energy was put to waste, and the marginal utility value of each megawatt of capacity in the system drops with the increase of total capacity in the system. And we are starting to waste a lot of energy already in 2028. So in 2028, in the optimistic scenario, we would waste more than 5 terawatt hours of energy. So that is a generation from 5 gigawatts of PV or 2 gigawatts of wind generates for the whole year.
Dalej mam przedstawione to samo w tabelce.
The same presented in the table. So in 2035, we have a situation where more than 50 terawatt hours of energy is not fed to the grid because of the inability to consume this energy. And this is in line with the Polish TSO's forecasts. So we are unable to fully decarbonize our economy without introducing certain flexibility to our power system. So out of the 190 or 198 terawatt hours that could be generated from renewables, only 144 terawatt hours will be actually evacuated, will be actually fed to the system to cover the demand, and the rest of this energy will be wasted. How much of this flexibility do we need to save this energy? So according to the Pareto principle, we made an assumption that we only want to do what is most profitable or viable.
80% energii utraconej.
So for 80% of lost energy, we need to add some flexibility every year. This year, with 34 gigawatt hours of curtailment, we would need 1,200 megawatts of flexibility in the system. Of course, with such small volumes of energy, it's better to waste it and not use these optimization tools. But later on, we see that with time, the energy put to waste grows at a higher rate, at a faster pace than the flexibility needed in the system. So in 2035, in order to save 80% of the 34 terawatt hours of energy, we would need only 7,700 megawatts of flexibility in the system. And this will have to be reached using a number of solutions, because very often these hours will be next to each other. So for 5 days in a row, we will have 10 gigawatts of energy too much in every hour. And we will not be able to store it in lithium-ion battery storage because the capacity would have to be too large. We can use it to produce hydrogen, but we would need the electrolyzers need a certain minimum number of operating hours to be profitable. So we cannot only use curtailment power for electrolyzers. So we need a lot of education on the demand side, that shifting energy consumption from one hour to another would save money. And it also saves energy that would be otherwise lost. We also need peak storage, pumped storage power plants, because they have a large buffer in the form of a reservoir, and interconnectors as the cheapest solution of power dispatch issue. So currently, with 23% of renewables in the system, the maximum load of system power plants is slightly above 20 gigawatts. In 2035, it changes in a linear fashion. When offshore enters into the picture, it will have a significant impact, sudden impact on the system. With the increase in renewables capacity to 100 gigawatts, the maximum load of power plants in the system increases to 22 gigawatts. However, the hourly distribution changes. Currently, we have relatively few hours with extremely high load in the system. And we have an increasing number of hours with the low power needed. With increased share of renewables, we will have very few hours with average load in the system and sudden peaks of demand when there is no wind and sun, where it will not make sense to keep conventional units running, and the flexibility will then be used to satisfy this sensitive demand. I have this slide here. We have residual load. How much electricity we have to generate in conventional units in specific years. Currently in conventional units, in 2023, we will generate about 130, 120, 140 terawatt hours of energy. And the gap between the blue line and the red line, the blue line is demand and the red line is what conventional units have to generate. This gap will increase with the increase in the share of renewables. And we can see the share of renewables in the demand after taking into account the losses related to the inability of the power grid to accept energy when there's too much energy. So it drops from 98% to 65% without any mitigation measures.
Kolejna rzecz, którą już wiedząc o tym, że będziemy redukowani.
If we already know that we will be curtailed, we need to cope with this somehow. Usually when we sell electricity from a power plant, we sell it either at fixed price or we sell it at variable price or we sell it under an auction and then on the spot market. And according to what we have in our contracts, ourselves or our off-taker like Respect Energy, this energy is hedged on the market. And of course, when we sell electricity for years ahead, we use some yearly P80 or P90 figures, and it looks great as a total figure for a certain year. If we reduce the granulation or resolution, then our task becomes more difficult. Because generation from a wind farm will vary by plus minus 15% year by year. But if we look at the monthly figures, we can have differences of plus minus 60%. There are some months with 30% of average or up to 140% in extreme periods. So we need to make our forecasts for several years ahead. We need to have seasonal forecasts, quarterly and monthly forecasts, and then we go down to the lowest level of planning or scheduling, day ahead. So we have a forecast for our asset or the entire asset fleet in the whole of Poland, and we will sell it on the market. Let's say we have 5 gigawatts of energy too much in the system. So 5 gigawatts of wind and PV capacity did not sell their energy. We have fixing at 10:30 and 12:40 at the Polish Power Exchange. We forecast our generation in the morning. Time passes and the meteorological situation changes. So with the current system, this error between the expected value today and the actual production tomorrow is up to 15%. So the difference between what we forecast for tomorrow and what actually happens, there is a huge difference in terms of production volume. And there are days where in reality we generate 15% more, and there are days or hours where we produce 15% less. In aggregated relative values, it goes down to zero because there are hours with positive and there are hours with a negative difference. but in terms of
to już bardzo duże wartości megawattowe.
absolute figures, these are huge megawatt values. We plan for tomorrow, and tomorrow it turns out that we have 1 gigawatt less in wind.
Musimy dokonać redispatchingu
We
elektrowni.
need to redispatch our assets. So the 5 gigawatts that were supposed to be curtailed has to be reduced to 4 gigawatts in curtailment.
W tej chwili nie mamy do tego systemowych narzędzi.
And we do not have any system-wide tools for that.
Niewiele wiatraków w Polsce
So I don't think that many
wyłączyć teraz, bo nagle
wind turbines in Poland can get curtailed right now because it's minus 100 zlotys.
tak samo niewiele wiatraków jest
And
w stanie
equally few wind turbines can get curtailed because we know that next week we will have minus 100 zlotys. No one will do that.
rynek będzie się mierzył z tymi problemami.
So due to the fact that our market will have to face these issues, we have prepared a technology solution
które jest sprzężone z naszymi
that is
prognozami.
coupled to our forecasts, both weather forecasts and price forecasts.
Ma feed z bieżących cen rynkowych.
And there is a feed with current market prices.
Czy naszymi, czy klienta.
It is also connected to our assets, and in case of negative prices, the asset is disconnected, is curtailed, and once the prices return to positive, then
Dzisiaj na jutro mamy dodatnie ceny.
it is restarted, the assets are restarted.
I te ceny
If there are negative prices for tomorrow, we will purchase the energy
ujemnych cenach.
that we sold at positive prices, and we make money on not producing.
Takie nasze narzędzie riskeru, które
So this is our tool that we've been using.
ono idzie w parze z naszą skadą, którą
It's in
stworzyliśmy.
line with the scale that we developed in order to make the life of generators easier.
Całe urządzenie polega na tym, że
The
łączy
main
się
idea is to
z API
connect with API
elektrowni i
of
jest
a power
połączone
plant.
z naszym API.
It's connected to our API, and based on live figures from generation and the market,
Źródła.
the generation is optimized.
Chcemy, żeby ten system
We would like
służył do
this system
pomocy w bilansowaniu systemu
to
DOS.
help
W tej chwili,
balancing the
myślę, że
grid
PSE i operatorzy sieci
for PSE, because
my budujemy elektrownię
grid operators and PSE are not very happy that we develop plants and they have very limited possibility to control
w tym, żeby zmniejszyć
the system. And this solution should put operators of the transmission system at ease.
to narzędzie już może
So
wam
this tool can help you already now.
w niedziel wyłączyć swoją elektrownię zdalnie i
You'll be able to switch your asset off on Sunday and
generować
switch
dodatkowe
it on, back on, when the price is positive and generate additional streams of income.
To jest koniec mojej prezentacji.
That's the end of my presentation.
Chciałem przedstawić tak mniej
I
więcej
just wanted to outline the picture of the market in the future. Of course, we
mamy status
focus
quo,
our forecast on the status quo of the demand, and by adding hydrogen and electric cars and heat pumps
ekstremalnie duży wzrost
will cause an extreme increase of electricity consumption in the country and even a greater need to provide flexibility of the system. Because 1 million electric cars
ładujących się codziennie, jak ktoś
charged every day
będzie mieć jeszcze gorszy.
when people return from their work will have even a worse impact on the grid.
Więc to też będzie musiało zostać zarządzone.
And this will have to be managed
W
somehow.
tej chwili w Polsce około
At the moment in Poland, roughly 25% of primary energy is used as electricity, and simple mathematical calculations show that all these figures
można przemnożyć
can be multiplied by 4, and then
scenariusz
we will get
takiej pełnej dekarbonizacji.
the full decarbonization scenario of the Polish economy.
ze względu na to, że jakbym powiedział, że będziemy mieć 700...
If I tell you that we're going to have 700 terawatt hours of demand, this would not sound realistic from the point of if I tell you that we're going to have 400 gigawatts in renewables, this would not sound realistic. We'd like to build at least 1,000 megawatts onshore per year. That's why I decided to show you these scenarios and the forecast that seems feasible, and it is feasible. And our economic position in decades to come will depend on what we will actually do. Of course, we don't have to generate hydrogen. We can import hydrogen. It is also a solution. We don't have to manufacture fertilizers. We can import them. And then we don't need any additional capacity in renewables. We don't need new atoms, and everything will be fine. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'd like to wish you a very good and fruitful conference.